requisite 2 minutes. I was waiting to give folks to enter. Good afternoon, and thank you again for joining us for our keynote event, Can Speech Truly Be Free? Who Can Say What When? My name is Dania Matos. I'm the Associate Chancellor and Chief Diversity Officer here at UC Merced, and I use she, her pronouns. It is my great honor to introduce you to all our Chancellor, Juan Sanchez Munoz, for our opening remarks. Chancellor.
Thank you, Danya. Thank you, and thank your team that helped put together this inaugural event here at UC Merced. I tell you, there are a few topics that are more important than this principle of free speech. And so I'm very eager to hear our keynote speaker and to learn more about her thoughts and experience with this particular topic, as well as others over the course of the week. I think your leadership role and that of your team in bringing this to our university is in keeping with our commitment to difficult dialogues, inclusive dialogues, the representation of many voices on our campus, and engage them both intellectually and personally, and understand their role in our own education as future graduates or employees of the University of California. So I'm very eager to hear today's remarks and to participate in this week's events. And I can't tell you how proud I am of all of those that have helped organize this inaugural week, which we hope that will inspire other similar events throughout the course of the year that bring a variety of voices and experiences and standpoints and epistemologies to our campus to engage with, to honor, to respect, and to help them become part of our own education, both as students, but also as professionals like you and I. So again, I want to welcome all who are part of this, and including some people whose names I recognize on the screen. Thank you for joining us here at UC Merced, and let me turn it back over to you to make a more formal introduction of our keynote.
Thank you, Chancellor. It's been such a pleasure to learn from you and grow with you. And thank you for your support of all of these important events. I also want to thank the UC National Center for Free Speech and Civic Engagement, who provided the funding, as well as our Free Speech Fellow, who kicked off our week yesterday for our hate speech and free speech event. If you joined us yesterday, I hope you enjoyed the insightful dialogue and walked away with some tools. We will be providing that recording. We are recording this session as well, and we hope you're able to join us for the entire week. With that, I wanted to ground our work, as we often do, in our land and labor acknowledgement, which will be shared right now. Local Indigenous people, including the Yokuts and Miwok, who understand the earth as a place for everyone, first inhabited the land where UC Merced is located. When we address diversity on this campus, we do so boldly, daring to look forward and backward, imagining diversity's demand for the 21st century and the importance of diversity, and addressing past wrongs, reaffirming humanity, and ensuring a reconciliatory path of redress for the future. The most prominent path on our campus is called Scholars Lanes. By day, you can see, hear, and witness the embodiment of our diversity through campus community members making their way across campus, framed by the slopes and peaks of the Sierra Nevada. I know that, while we've been virtual, or that might be sort of an imagining, but if you close your eyes, we can see that happening. So some of the reflection questions that come a part of that, as you listen to the conversation today, is what intentions do you have to disrupt and dismantle colonialism beyond the land acknowledgement? And what is your unit, department, organization doing beyond acknowledging those whose land and labor allow you to live, work, and or learn in that space? Important questions for us today. I'm now going to turn it over to Ona Primitivo, our Director of Equity and Justice, who's going to walk us through some community guidelines. Ona?
Great, thank you, Danya. Part of our whole week is just a breadth of knowledge and different guests coming and sharing knowledge. And part of that also is for us to engage in such dialogue. So just a couple community agreements as we share this space, that we agree to speak for ourselves and allow ourselves to speak. Allow others to speak for themselves with no pressure to represent or explain the whole group, really using I statements and owning your narrative. That we agree to listen with resilience, hanging in there when it's hard to hear, right? grappling with multiple perspectives and striving for intellectual humility. We agree to consider asking questions and check out that assumption we are making rather than taking it as fact. We agree to share airtime and participate within the suggested timeframes. So again, really capturing our time together. Of course, we agree not to interrupt except to indicate that we cannot hear or did not hear the speaker. And so during our time together, the chat will be disabled, but when we get into the group dialogue, it will be reactivated. We agree to pass or pass for now if we're not ready to willing to respond to a question posed by the group or our keynote. We agree that when we discuss our experiences with people, we are not present and we will not attach names or identifying information unless we have permission to do so. The importance of consent is critical. And we agree that this space of learning, that recognizing no one, including the presenter, is able to know all of the things that we're about to talk. And we are all in the process of that learning. And also want to share that, identify our learning edge and where it is and push it. For example, whenever you think I already know this, ask yourself, how can I take this deeper? Or how am I applying the practice that I already know in the realm of equity, diversity, and inclusion. So those are community agreements, and I will keep reminding folks on our chat of these agreements, and by joining us, we are agreeing for this fruitful conversation. And I turn it back to Danya.
Thank you, Onar. Just a little bit of the agenda for today. President White is going to deliver a fabulous keynote address. We are then going to move into a moderated discussion and then an open Q&A where we really want to hear from you and engage with you and have you walk away with the tools that empower you to have these dialogues that matter. So with no further ado, it is my extraordinary pleasure to introduce President White, who I'm hoping I can call a friend. I've so enjoyed getting to know her through this process. President White is the 21st president of DePaul University. Dr. White has spent over 30 years working in higher ed, most recently as a vice chancellor for student affairs and a professor of practice at Washington University in St. Louis. She is the first woman and the first person of color to serve as DePaul president. That's just a round of applause right there, President White. Dr. White is active nationally in several higher education organizations and has served on the board of directors for the Association for Sustainability in Higher Ed and for the National Association of Student Personnel Administrators, NASPA, for many of you, Foundation. Dr. White earned her undergraduate degree in psychology and English from the University of California, Berkeley. So one of our own, y'all. Welcome home, Dr. White. And a PhD from Stanford University in education administration and policy analysis with an emphasis in higher education. She also participated in Harvard's Management and Leadership and Education program. That's just a little bit. You're going to learn more about why she was the perfect expert and a prominent leader in this area. Please join me in using your Zoom reaction applause button celebration. Welcome, President White.
Thank you so much, Danya. Thank you so much for that enthusiastic introduction. And it is my great pleasure to have the opportunity to serve as your keynote speaker for UC Merced Free Speech Week. And I look forward to the opportunity to one day visit what I know is a beautiful campus. And I want you all to know I've got on blue and gold in honor of the University of California. You can see the gold, but I don't know if my blue suit is actually coming through as blue and not black. So you all know something about me now from that formal introduction. But when someone is giving a talk, I think it's also important for the audience to know the speaker a bit more personally to provide a context for one's perspective. So you know I'm a proud UC Berkeley graduate, and I spent many moments on Sproul Plaza walking through Sather Gate where this iconic free speech picture was taken. I attended UC Berkeley on the tail end of the free speech movement and laugh often at the joke that if one remembers the 60s, one probably wasn't really there. More seriously, the rigorous debate on any number of issues I encountered both inside of and outside of the classroom at Cal helped to shape my understanding of the ideals of a liberal arts education. Also helping to shape my ideals and values about the promise of higher education, particularly for students who are underrepresented on our college campuses, was the 10 years I spent at the University of California, Irvine, 6 of those 10 years directing the UCI Cross-Cultural Center, the first in the UC system and one of the first in the country. And this picture is a bona fide back in the day picture from the 1980s. Check out my hairstyle and my shoes. This next picture is what the UCI Cross-Cultural Center looks like now, thanks to student advocacy to move the center from a trailer in what I call a booth in the back in the corner of the dark of the campus to a brand new building in a prominent place in the center of the campus. I identify as African American. My African American heritage is a fundamental part of who I am, and I proudly proclaim that Black Lives Matter. As a college president, something I never aspired to or imagined I would become, I have a commitment to an institutional environment that is open to the free exchange of ideas and one that is equally committed to diversity, equity, inclusion, and social justice. And I am not a lawyer. My perspective on free speech and freedom of expression is from the lens of an educator, not from someone who has a legal background. Since I was invited to serve as your keynote speaker for Free Speech Week at UC Merced, I think it's really important to start my more formal reflections with some definitions to make sure, at least for the purposes of my remarks, we share a common definition of free speech and freedom of expression. So what are some definitions of freedom of speech and freedom of expression? Freedom of speech refers to the individual right guaranteed by the US Constitution to articulate ideas and opinions without fear of government retaliation, censorship, or sanction. So what this means is that free speech is our right of citizens enshrined in the Constitution, not to have the government interfere with our ability to speak out, offer our opinion, without fear of censorship, retaliation, or punishment by the government. This constitutionally protected right of free speech extends to public colleges and universities, though doesn't actually apply to private colleges. So for example, a private college could choose to restrict speech on campus in ways that public colleges cannot. However, in the spirit of academic freedom and freedom of inquiry, the overwhelming majority of private colleges, including my own, DePauw, are committed to the principles of freedom of expression. Freedom of expression refers broadly to the right to hold opinions without interference and includes the right to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas of all kinds, orally, in writing, print, art, or through any media. And definitions of freedom of expression also encompass verbal and nonverbal behaviors that express a person's opinion, point of view, or identity. Thus, I prefer to refer to speech on our college campuses using that broader term of freedom of expression. And I believe all of us should be committed to the value of freedom of expression on our college campuses, not as a fallback to the argument that we must adhere to free speech laws because some of us are legally required to do so, but because the fundamental value and cornerstone of our liberal arts education is an educational experience where diverse viewpoints and ideas are welcomed, freely offered, critiqued, and expressed. And when I refer to liberal arts education, I'm not just referring to institutions like DePauw that are by their nature and founding liberal arts colleges, but I am referring to a liberal arts education that prepares all of us to be citizens of the world. An equally important fundamental value on a college campus should also be supporting and sustaining a diverse and inclusive community. And our twin values of freedom of expression and inclusive community should not be in conflict with one another, though sometimes, particularly in the lived student experiences, students perceive that they are. This next slide provides some definitions of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Diversity is defined as what most of us would refer to as demographic diversity, the presence in our communities of individuals with different identities. Inclusion is defined as providing an affirming environment in which all individuals are valued members of our community, respected for the diversity they bring to our communities, and provided access to resources and opportunities. And equity is described as a thriving environment where our principles, practices, and opportunities ensure that each member of our diverse community has the tools and support necessary to achieve their hopes and their dreams. So I will talk about freedom of expression, and I will also talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion as two important fundamental values on college campuses. Ironically, one of my colleagues at DePauw, Andy Collison, who directs the DePauw Prindle Center for Ethics, said that some of the challenges we may experience on our college campuses supporting our twin values of freedom of expression and diversity, equity, and inclusion are actually because of the increasing diversity on our campuses. If we all thought the same, had the same perspective, ideology, and experiences, there would likely be much less conflict and disagreement. For many of our students, college is the first time they have lived or studied in an environment more diverse than the neighborhoods in which they grew up, and or have been exposed for the first time to diversity of thought on particular issues. So what I'd like to do next, as part of setting the context for what I know will be a rich and robust discussion about freedom of expression, is to provide some data focused on how students primarily view various aspects of freedom of expression. This next slide is from the 2018 Knight Commission survey, which asked college presidents and students questions related to how important welcoming and protecting citizens' free speech rights and promoting an inclusive society that is welcoming to diverse groups, how important both of these two things are to our democracy. As you can see on this slide, both college presidents and students see the answers to both of these questions as overwhelmingly extremely or very important, though on both of the questions, students' answers are not as high as presidents. And this side suggests to me that philosophically, both college presidents and students value both inclusivity and freedom of speech. However, the data gets a little bit more complicated when students are asked more specifically about the kind of campus environment that they want to be a part of. This slide asks students their preference for their preferred campus environment: a positive environment that prohibits certain speech, or an open learning environment that allows offensive speech. And the data itself didn't define offensive speech specifically. It includes speech that is hurtful to particular groups or individuals, and also ranges all the way to hate speech. So under that umbrella of offensive speech is speech that is hurtful, or speech that could be construed as hate speech. I'm actually not sure why this question is asked as an either or, though I suppose an assumption could be that it's difficult to have a positive campus environment for all students if offensive speech is permitted, and it's difficult to have an open learning environment if certain speech is prohibited. This slide indicates that overwhelmingly students prefer an open environment, one as defined by the survey as an environment that would allow offensive speech, to a positive campus environment, one that is defined by the survey as prohibiting certain speech, though the percentage regarding an open environment decreased from 2016 to 2017. And this next slide provides some additional information, which indicates that an open campus environment is preferred to a larger extent for students who identify as Republican, independent, white, and who are men, than for students who identify as Democrats, Black, or identify as women. So what this may suggest is that the effect of an open campus environment, one where all speech, including offensive speech, is permitted, is experienced differently by students dependent upon their identity. This next slide focuses on students' views on campus policies to restrict speech. Students are open to campus administrators restricting certain forms of speech on campus, particularly racial slurs and language intentionally offensive to certain groups, and the prohibition against the wearing of stereotypical costumes. And about 1/3 of students think the administration should be able to restrict expression of political viewpoints that are upsetting or offensive to certain groups. This next slide focuses on student views of policies that have speech implications. And in this slide, students also overwhelmingly favor safe spaces on campus and designated free speech zones. and just slightly more than 50% of students support speech codes that would restrict speech on campus that might be allowed in society more generally. So for example, the First Amendment does have, allows all kinds of speech. And what students are saying is that might be okay in society generally, but on a college campus in a community, we believe that certain forms of speech should be restricted. This next slide focuses on where speech takes place. And much of the speech focused on political and social ideas that occurs among students occurs online, which I suspect is no surprise to any of us. And social media, as this next slide will show, is not the best avenue for promoting free expression. Students and others, all of us, don't always behave in the way that we would hope we would behave in a social online space. If you want to learn more about the Knight Foundation survey, I just quoted a few of the data points. There is a link here in my slideshow, and Danielle will make sure that you all have a copy of the slideshow and folks are interested in learning more about that particular survey. I'd now like to turn to some data from a different survey, but also a survey of students. And this survey is from the 2020 FIRE survey. And FIRE is an organization that stands for the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. And many of you may already be familiar with this organization. I certainly am. FIRE has established itself as the free speech police for college campuses and focuses its work on ensuring college campuses don't prohibit or limit free speech in any way. Last year, FIRE surveyed 55 college campuses, mostly large public institutions, though several Ivy League and 2 smaller liberal arts colleges, including my own, were also surveyed. There's over 4,000 colleges across the country, and FIRE identified 55 to survey for the data that I'm going to share with you. The results of the FIRE survey include that 70% of students believe their college administration conveys to students that free speech is protected on campus, though this belief is stronger among white students than among Black students. And 60% of students at one time or another have practiced self-censorship. And this happens more with students who identify as conservative than for students who identify as liberal. Only 25% of students report that they generally feel very comfortable having a discussion on a controversial political topic with a classmate, and race is the topic most frequently identified by students as difficult to have an open and honest conversation on campus. 43% of all students and 65% of Black students identified race as the most challenging topic to have an open and honest conversation. This next set of data points indicates that 57% of students say that they believe that their college would defend a speaker's right to express his or her views in the case of controversy over offensive expression, though interestingly enough, 42% of students believe that their college would then punish the speaker for making that particular statement. A minority of students, and this percentage varies dependent upon the topic, would support allowing a speaker on campus whose views are perceived as hateful, harmful, or run counter to their beliefs. So for example, 18% of students would support a speaker who promotes the idea that abortion should be completely illegal. Only 15% would support allowing the campus allowing a speaker who promotes the idea that the US should support Israeli military policy. And only 17% of students would support their campus allowing a speaker who promotes the idea that some racial groups are less intelligent than others. Or conversely, just using these examples, and there were several others that were provided by FIRE in their study, the majority of students would not support their school allowing a speaker on campus who promotes these ideas or several others that were identified in the study. And for those students who choose to protest speakers on campus, 82% say that violent tactics are never acceptable when protesting a campus speaker, which means that 18% of students who completed the survey believe there are instances when violence might be acceptable to protest a speaker. 27% of students said that shouting a speaker down is acceptable in some instances, and 30% of students said that the most acceptable form of protest for a campus speaker is removing flyers and advertisements for that particular event. So for more information about the FIRE survey, I also have a link in my slides. And also in their narrative summary of their report, FIRE also confirms the point that I made earlier in my talk about the effect of diversity on freedom of expression. I'm quoting from their report, which says that ideologically monolithic student bodies have fewer dissenters who might feel prevented from speaking out. So what they are saying is that diversity itself creates an environment where ideas are going to be contested. And if you're at a campus where most of the students come from the same background, or there's less diversity, then there's probably fewer dissenters on campus. So what we see on college campuses across the country related to free speech and some of the contention that we have seen or perhaps experienced is really a byproduct of the fabulous diversity that we have on our campus. We're all trying to figure out a way in which we can live together in a diverse environment and create an environment where we can share our perspective, our ideas, and have a chance to talk with one another about where in which we see those differences. So collectively, what do the data that I shared suggest regarding our challenges on campus related to our twin values of freedom of expression and diversity, equity, and inclusion? Here are some of my thoughts, and I look forward to also hearing yours. Here are some of my thoughts related to what I think we should take away from the data. That student perspectives on freedom of expression and the effect of allowing all manner of speech on the student experience really varies dependent upon one's identity and one's ideological perspective. And a campus's commitment to the values of freedom of expression and diversity, equity, and inclusion may be much easier from a philosophical perspective and much harder in reality. Campus administrators are largely seen by students as advocating for and protecting free speech. Those students also see administrators as the folks who punish people who say or do something that others might find to be offensive. Students are largely in favor of administrative restrictions on speech and expression, particularly when that expression is hurtful or harmful, including campus speech codes, free speech zones, safe spaces, campus policies that restrict hate speech or not inviting particular speakers. And many students practice self-censorship. I think this is for fear of being socially ostracized or saying the wrong thing. Social media is most definitely not helpful to promoting civil discourse. And race is a particularly difficult topic for students, and I would contend really for all of us to discuss. I do have some thoughts on how we might approach all of this, but I'm going to save that for later after we have the Q&A, as I would really like to hear your thoughts about what I have shared and what you all think our responses should be on campus to freedom of expression. Is free speech really free? And who gets to say what when? So I will stop there and turn it over to Dania to moderate our conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, President White. That was so insightful, and thank you for providing us with all those data points. I know we were sharing the links as you were going along, and if we were in person, we'd be settling into some comfy chairs for our moderated discussion. So I'm going to try to emulate a fireside chat here. You and I, but I hope folks will enjoy and get your questions ready, because after this, we're going to open up the chat and we really want to hear from you and engage with you on the dialogue. So President White, I want to take us to the national discourse.
Yes.
I love how you brought, sort of race being the most challenging topic. And as you know, free speech being a core value in our democracy, when we conceptualized this event, we did not imagine the insurrection of January 6th. And nor did we imagine the anti-Black violence of at least last year. So in your opinion, how has the current political and racial climate at the national level influenced the discourse around free speech and hate speech within higher education? But if I'm taking your term, it's freedom of expression, which
Yes.
we really like, and I'm going to quote you on it, but yes, how do you think those are being influenced?
So I think it's certainly elevated both those twin values that I spoke about, how important it is to create environments where we can bring to the surface the critical issues that are affecting the lived experiences, particularly of folks who have been historically underrepresented in higher education, and then the impact of those kinds of national events on our discourse on campus, and why students, particularly I think students from historically marginalized populations, why it can be challenging for us to bring speakers to campus who students in particular feel are not affirming their humanities. And so, I started my slideshow with the picture from UC Berkeley because, that is very meaningful to me. I believe very strongly in freedom of expression. I believe we cannot be an educational institution if we cannot allow all ideas to flow and provide an opportunity for us to confront all kinds of issues. And at the same time, I recognize how difficult these conversations can be. And we've seen that on the national level. With the way in which folks have responded to Black Lives Matter. Some folks seeing that as a hate group, yet not seeing other groups who advocate for things that I don't support, not in that same vein.
No, absolutely. I think I just saw Judas and the Black Messiah on HBO Max, and I think that, sort of talking about, the differences within agencies is really important. You talked a little bit about this, but I wanted to bring it back, and I really appreciated the grounding of your photos and just sharing your journey as an administrator. I'm very familiar with fire. I'd like to say you brought the fire, but a different kind of fire. So thank you. But in thinking about freedom of expression and advocacy, right? We know, as you talked about, your identity impacts, right? Sort of what you term as harmful. There's past trauma, right? We're still undoing the enduring legacy of slavery in this country for 400 plus years. So when you think about freedom of expression, how can it be leveraged as a tool to help advance equity, diversity, inclusion, not only within higher education, but beyond? So beyond, obviously, the shutdowns of it, how can we use it as an asset?
So I really think it's important for us to understand our history and why freedom of expression is a really important value for all of us, particularly, for young folks who clearly weren't around in the 1960s like I was. But what folks may not remember about the 1960s is the reason the free speech movement became a movement is because the governor of California at the time was trying to legislate that students on the UC Berkeley campus could not pass out political leaflets and literature and not use their voice against the Vietnam War. And so in that context, free speech was being used to stifle a particular viewpoint. And so I want my students always to understand, while I understand that right now, certain forms of speech you may find to be uncomfortable, uneasy, and even offensive, and you want us to be able to shut that down. But once we start shutting down, that speech, somebody else is going to come back and shut down your ability to speak. And so I think it's really important that we understand why freedom of expression really is an opportunity for those of us who have been historically marginalized to use our voice to change systems that other folks have not wanted to pay attention to. And it's a dangerous, slippery slope when we begin to say certain speech is just not allowable, because tomorrow somebody is going to turn around and tell me that I can't say Black Lives Matter.
No, absolutely. I mean, if we look at the juridical history of this country, so much has changed, right? On what we deem acceptable and things like that.
Right.
So we're a campus that likes to, I often call us about developing our folks as transformative practitioners and giving folks individual strategies and just helping and empowering them to have these dialogues that matter. And particularly like many campuses, we are a campus that has navigated these issues. Can you share your thoughts on how individuals can identify and navigate that boundary that you spoke up between freedom of expression that respects the individual perspectives and when freedom of expression may be harmful or hateful, as you identified?
So I hope folks will do what I try to do, was acknowledge both. acknowledge the importance of freedom of expression and explain why. And then also acknowledge the hurt to the community that occurs when people say or do things that are offensive. And also, I think we have to go one step further. We have our DePauw dialogue tomorrow, which is an opportunity for us to bring our community together to talk about some of these critical issues. And we're going to talk about bias and unconscious bias and the way in which bias can contribute to the undermining of a community. And I'm still working on my remarks, but one of my role models is Nelson Mandela. And what makes Nelson Mandela such a role model for me is he really talks about this issue of grace, right? So the idea that a man who'd been in prison for 27 years can come out of prison and offer grace to the people who imprisoned him. And, there was a whole lot that went that came before him offering grace, right? There was a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and there are lots of pieces before you get to grace. But the point is, I think we also have to give people grace because it has been rare where somebody has done or said something offensive where I have felt it has been purposeful. There are a few folks who, yeah, maybe that's the case, but that's not the large part of our community. It often is, back to that place where people are self-censoring themselves because they're afraid to say or do something wrong. I think we have to give people grace. So we, have our fundamental values that freedom of expression is important on our campus, diversity, equity, and inclusion is important on our campus. We want to be a campus community where everyone is affirmed. And if I, Lori White, say something that is offensive to somebody else, I may have the right to say it, but it doesn't mean I should say it. And if I do say it, I would like for somebody to give me the grace to say, you know what, Lori, you may not know how that affected me. I want to tell you why what you said is offensive, and I want to now forgive you for saying it and ask you not to do it again. The minute we, call people out and shun them, that doesn't get us to a place where we can establish a community. And so I think it's a long answer to your question, but I think we have to affirm the right of people to say things. We have to help people understand that if we're going to be a community, what that means when people say or do things that others find to be offensive. And we have to give grace and forgiveness to people who have done that so that they can now be part of the army of change.
Thank you, President White. As a woman of faith, I find myself being like, preach! Like, certainly one of
those sing every now and then too, but maybe I'll say that for the end.
No, I think that concept is really important, and also talking about impact versus intent, right?
Yes.
Particularly as you were talking about the increase on social media, right? Those statistics, and now that we're in a virtual environment, right? I wonder those statistics that are kind of come out versus Zoom and the boldness, right?
Yes.
Comes with the expression on social media versus in person, right? And I think having that, and I know personally, I think I sort of paused my consumption of certain things online just because I knew I couldn't read anymore.
Yeah,
and so I choose to engender these spaces. So thank you.
Which is not to say that we don't grow weary, right? And so I want to acknowledge the weariness, of always, for the students in particular who feel like, well, I'm always the one who has to bring stuff up. I'm always the one who has to tell somebody that was offensive. I'm always the one who has to go to the administration. I get the weariness. However, I also understand that we can't move forward unless, we're willing to have those difficult conversations with folks who just may not know.
Yeah, absolutely. I am. Well, this is a preview, but we are going to be launching Dialogues That Matter. We just got the funding from the same organization that gave us the funding for Free Speech Week. So please stay tuned for that. Thank you, UC's National Center for Free Speech and Civic Engagement. And I wanted to move us to some tangibles, right?
Sure. Yes.
Those takeaway, those nuggets, those things that people are going to take copious notes on and jot down. So in your experience, what are key practices, programs, and or policies that you would say are vital for sharing freedom of expression and to support and experience on university campuses? I know you're rather early in your tenure,
Sure.
but it sounds like the DePauw Dialogues is already an instrumental and impactful space. But are there any others? I know we've got some faculty, staff, students on the line, community members. Folks are really engaged in this topic and wanting to help us move forward.
Sure. And I will have to say that the DePauw Dialogues really were from student advocacy. our students 7 or so years ago went to our faculty and said, we need to have a day with no classes and offices closed where the entire campus can gather to talk about critical issues. So shout out to the students. So
Wait, it's completely shut down?
yeah, it's completely shut down tomorrow. Right.
Oh.
And we're a small, we're a smaller community. It would probably be harder for you to do that. Although UC Merced, as compared to UC Berkeley, you all could probably do it. But really shout out to student advocacy, because if this is important, then we should all be paying attention and not have other things that are distracting us.
I love
So
that.
actually, to your question about some of the things that we can do, could the person who's helping me with the slides flip to the next set of slides, because I do have some thoughts. And so I'll share those now. So first is that I think you have to lead with your values and not legalities. So I think it's really important for a campus to have their statement of freedom of expression. Here are 3 samples. The University of Chicago, people often talk about the Chicago principles. They're one. The University of Richmond, they just completed theirs, and Washington University in St. Louis. I'm a big proponent of leading with values because you should always go back to what it is you value as an institution. It's a lot easier than saying you have to do this because this is the law or this is in the student code of conduct. Let's start with our values and let's have the other things flow from there. So if you don't have a value statement yet on freedom of expression, then I would encourage you to develop one. The next slide. I think it's really important to talk to students about the why. Why is it important for them to be able to engage in civil dialogue about, with those ideas which we may not personally disagree with? I really do, and I said this in the beginning, it's fundamental to our educational values. I think it's really important part of what it means to be part of a democratic society. I already mentioned it preserves their rights against others who might disagree with them. And, all of us some way in our mission statement say that we are preparing people for leaders. Our tagline is, leaders that the world needs. I'm sure you have a tagline, something about leadership. And so, the ability to be an effective leader means that you have to be able to have a cogent argument with somebody, even if you don't agree with them. You can't just walk away. Imagine if my faculty felt some kind of way about something that I had said or done, and I said, I'm out, I'm just walking away, I'm not going to participate in this conversation anymore, right? I'm not going to be present very long, right? So I think, again, we have to help students understand the why. And I think we have to start right from our orientation experience. When I worked at WashU, one of the things that I did before I left as the Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs was implemented a module in the new student orientation program on freedom of expression. So I think it has to start from day one. Why would we expect students to know what we mean by these ideals without giving them the tools to be able to engage in these dialogues? So I think that that's really important as well, is to help students figure out what tools do I need? When I'm in a classroom and I might be the only one who looks like me, and somebody brings something up, what are the tools that I need to be able to engage in that dialogue? So I think it's important that we arm students with those and ensure that whatever our policies and practices are, as I said, align with our value statements. I think, and I really appreciate the beginning of this session, where you started with your land acknowledgement, you started with your values, you started with our principles of entering into this space. I think that that is really important because, again, just telling students this is the reason we have to do it because the law says we have to do it is not enough. I think we have to acknowledge the concerns that students and other members of our community might have about the impact of what the legal rights might be on our values as a civil and inclusive culture. And reckoning with our institutional and local history is really, really important. So just kudos to you all for starting in that way. I really felt invited into the space and very respectful of the space as well. So thank you for that. And then I think I've got a couple more. And you asked me about this also, but understanding that what's happening nationwide and what's happening in a local community affects our environment on campus. So we can't ignore and think that our campus is just, our own little microcosm. And so all of us should continue to be aware of what's going on as if we couldn't not be aware, but also think about what then do we need to do as a campus community to respond to what is happening nationwide or happening in our local communities. And then I think we've got a role model as faculty and staff. There are not good role models in our nation right now for how to have respectful dialogue with one another. It's really, I just think it's embarrassment to our country. And so knowing that we can't look to our leaders for that, what can we do as faculty and staff to role model this? And, lastly, understand the work is hard, because if it was easier, we would have already figured out how to do it.
Thank you. Those are so good, such good nuggets. So hopefully we'll be able to post and share those. And for the land and labor acknowledgement, I think, I loved your keep calm, I'm not a lawyer, I am one, right? Now turned chief diversity officer. But, when we talk about our diversity statement, we talk about speaking to people's humanity. And as a legal scholar, I know that the law often doesn't do that, right? Sort of understanding that. So when we speak about justice, it's to talk about that. So I really appreciate your reflections, because I think it spoke just to that point. So takeaways, this is our last question, y'all. So we're going to open up the chat soon for your Q&As. I see some questions have already come in. So can you please discuss key take-home concepts that need to be considered or understood to create a vibrant campus that supports freedom of expression while simultaneously acknowledging sort of that hate speech?
Yeah. I think doing just that. I always like to say to folks, these are two equally important fundamental values to a liberal arts education. And we have to be committed to both. And we also have to understand why they shouldn't inherently be in conflict with one another. Sometimes they are. So I think a key takeaway for us is to affirm that these are our values. If they are for you at the University of California, Merced, I think they should be. And I think, whether you've said them directly or not, they are, just in the way in which you all have showed up in this space. And then also talk about, I always talk to my students, and I know I talk a lot about students. It doesn't mean that faculty and staff are unimportant, but I think, a lot of times these issues come to the forefront in the student experience, which is why I wanted to focus on students. Is I like to talk with my students about, we are the community that we seek. So let us work together to identify what we think our community principles should be, right? So if these are our twin fundamental values, then let's talk about what our community principles should be to live up to these values. And then what are we going to do to hold folks accountable? And then what happens when folks don't live up to these values on our campus? What are we going to do about it, right? And so I think that's what we need to do, is invite students into the conversation to help shape what it is that we as an institution decide we're going to do when folks violate what I would call our community standards. You can't just lead with the rule book.
No, I know that all too well. Thank you very much, President White. I think that, I always talk about, I leave people in places better than I found them, because they inevitably leave me better. And you've left us better than you found us, just for being in this space with us and giving us such important resources that we can carry with us on our journey. You've been phenomenal. I learned this in a recent virtual dialogue, but that you can sort of how to high five everyone in the Hollywood Square. So if you're able, you can go up, side, and down. So I'm giving you that, if you're next to me, that high five and all those things. So now we're going to open up to the Q&A. I know if you all have to go, I understand, but I do want to say we have a giveaway at the end. So if you hang with us, you can be part of that. So I'm going to turn it over to Onar and questions to President White.
Great.
So we have one coming from Melissa. Melissa shares, thank you, Dr. White. I was able to hear you speak at the NASPA Student Affairs Law Conference in December 2019 in San Diego, where you spoke about inclusive hiring practices in the field of student affairs. I am concerned about the impact that free speech community controversies on college campuses, especially around issues of race, often disproportionately impact student affairs staff of color and those others historically marginalized identities as well. In terms of supporting marginalized students and who are negatively impacted, upset, and organizing a response, any thought on supporting staff of color who are often in the front line of contending these difficult, often painful situations? Any thoughts on impact and support?
Thanks for the question. And the person who asked the question, can you appear for me so I can see you?
Melissa? Yeah.
Melissa?
Absolutely. Let's unmute and give them
Yes, so I can see people's faces. I also, while you all are doing that, want to welcome some of my colleagues from DePauw. So a few of my DePauw ENs are also joining this space. So love having you all here as well. Thanks for being here. So Melissa.
Here she is. Melissa is also our UC National Center for Free Speech and Civic Engagement Fellow last year. So she started playing free speech with us last year. Hi, Melissa. You can unmute yourself, I believe.
Hi. I don't have much more to say other than my question. I didn't think I was going to show up, so you got me with my baseball cap and my t-shirt.
Oh, no worries about that. I just like
yeah.
to make that personal connection, Melissa. So
yeah, thank you for that. I loved your talk down in San Diego, and I was so glad that they were able to get you as a keynote. And thank you. I always think about staff and how we can support staff, and I definitely, as a grad student, have seen that impact disproportionately among staff. And
I agree.
I just would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Absolutely, because staff, particularly staff of color or staff from other historically underrepresented or marginalized backgrounds, they're the folks to whom students turn when these issues and incidents happen on campus. And so we are both experiencing perhaps our own trauma and then trying to do our best to hold up and support our students and also be university leaders, right? So that's a lot. And so, I think some of the things that we can do as staff is be there for one another. So create spaces where staff have affinity groups. I'm sure you have affinity groups for staff on campus. And if you don't, I hope that you do. But I remember when I was at Stanford, we certainly had a Black faculty and staff affinity group. And there were days when somebody would just put a shout out and say, hey, we just need to meet in family. Everybody bring your lunch, meeting at noon, and let's just talk about what's going on. It's nice to know that we're not alone, walking in this journey. Also, too, I think, for each one of us, it's helpful to have somebody to whom we can go, whether that's your mama, whether that's your mentor, whether that's the person you pay, for an hour every week to be your psychologist, whoever that person is, it is okay for us to have that person to whom we can turn, cry, talk about our frustrations, all of those pieces that are really important for us being able to show up as whole in the workplace every day. So, those are some of the ideas that I have that have worked for me.
Great, thank you. Right. And we have another one, question from Brandon Cooper. Okay. Brandon, did you want to come online?
Yeah, Brandon, can you make yourself known if you're comfortable? But I remember the rules, Onar, so folks don't have to make themselves known if they're not comfortable.
Yeah. Hello. I also have my baseball cap on, so I didn't expect to go.
I get it.
So do you want me to read the question?
Yes, please do.
Okay.
Yes.
So I said, my question is, in a political environment in which facts seem to be an ever less relied upon resource for discourse, and conspiracy theory is often confused for something known and true, how can we have honest conversations without disregarding and dismissing people that don't seem to be living in the same reality as us?
Yeah. So let me parse that question into two spaces. So we talked about discourse online. I think that's just a losing proposition, right? Because, people online don't really want to listen to facts. And so if you think you're going to convince, somebody from your high school who, believes in a conspiracy theory, and no matter what set of facts you put out there, they're probably not going to change their mind. You may feel the need to continue to engage with them, but that's probably not going to get you very far. However, on a college campus, we are about, what's the motto for the University of California? I should know. It's, seeking truth or let there be light or something like that. But the idea, I should know it, right? Because I'm a UC Berkeley graduate, I should have it memorized. But the idea is, at at an educational institution, we are about the pursuit of truth, right? So we have every right within our educational institutional environment to let folks know you can make any argument that you wish, but you have to make an argument that is grounded in the facts. And I think, that's one of the framing principles for deciding whether to invite a speaker or not. So yes, we should allow controversial people to speak on our campus, or whoever might decide that they're controversial, but only if the person is going to give a fact-based presentation that we can disagree with other facts, right? If somebody is just out there spewing, all kinds of things, that's really not what we're about as educational institutions. So I think we have every right to tell folks, you can absolutely make any argument that you wish, but it has to be grounded in the facts, because that's what we are all about. We are an educational institution focused on the pursuit of knowledge and truth.
Thank you so much.
Those online people.
Yeah, that's
That's
impossible.
right.
I
And
think
thanks, Mandy.
the snaps button.
Yeah.
There you go.
And the next question we have Sarah.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. Yeah, so you focused a lot on discourse in your talk, and in my eyes, discourse is an impossibility without time and space, which are both difficult to cultivate in an environment where people are struggling or just getting by financially. So as an HSI, MSI, and first generation serving institution, I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about how UC Merced can provide that time and space for dialogue amongst students, faculty, and staff. And I guess I'm thinking a bit about the contradiction that we see between our economic system and our political system in the United States, and how free speech intersects with that.
So you're right about the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. So, for those folks who have their masters or doctorates in higher ed, we're well familiar, right? That, food and shelter is important before we can think about higher order learning. So I'm wondering if there's a way to flip that around a bit in terms of the creating space, time and space. So, when I talked earlier about, somewhere in most of our mission statements is something about creating leaders. And so what we want to be able to do with our students, particularly students who are struggling in some way, who might be first generation, who are feeling the weight of the oppression of everything that's going on in the larger society, we want to arm them so that they can go out and be warriors for change, right? And so we want to empower them. And so, I don't see those as separate things. I see that as part of our responsibility, particularly at a place like UC Merced. You want to arm them so that when they go out into the world, they can be warriors for change, right? And so that's what I think that's the kind of conversation that we need to have for them. That, I know that you see this in the abstract. I know that you feel like, that folks don't understand, your humanity. And I understand how hurtful and frustrating that is. And it's overwhelming when you're trying to figure out how you're going to get your money for tuition for next semester or next quarter. We have to affirm that. We have to hear that. We have to continue to do everything we can to support and lift up our students. And we also have to tell them, we didn't admit you to UC Merced so that, when you graduate, you're just going to, buy a little house in the corner of the valley. And that's all you're going to do. We admitted you because we want you to change your neighborhood. We want you to change your community. We want you to change the state. We want you to change the nation. And so that's why we're engaging you in these kinds of conversations and giving you the tools to go out and stay on that battlefield.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Easier said than done, I know, but still important.
Right. And Dr. White, someone in the chat shared a James Baldwin quote, one of my favorite. We can disagree and still love each other unless your disagreement is rooted in my oppression and denial of my humanity and right choices.
Yes.
Okay.
One of my favorite quotes from one of my mentors is, you can't look for validation from your oppressor. Right. And what I mean by that is I'm not saying that everybody out there in the world is trying to oppress me or anybody else. But what I am saying is that, when somebody says or does something that is hurtful, I can't allow that person to define my humanity, right? Because I don't look to that person to affirm or validate me. And so, what can we do to work with our students to internalize that?
Great. Thank you. Yep. And we have another one, Ashley. You want to come on? There she is.
Hi.
Hi, Ashley.
Hi. So my question is kind of focusing on the whole, recently we've seen a lot about cancel culture
Yes.
pop up
Yes.
in speech. And so in my opinion, it's a little bit more about accountability than cancellation. So how does personal responsibility play into the free part of free speech or freedom of expression, or does it even play a part?
So, the data that I shared that, students feel it's okay to shout down a speaker, to tear down flyers, to perhaps resort to violence if somebody is, invited to campus and is a speaker with whom you vehemently disagree. I just think we can't be an educational institution about the world of ideas if we're canceling out those ideas that we find uneasy, uncomfortable, offensive, or hurtful. What I'd rather do is arm people with the facts about why their argument is wrong, or why I would like to convince them to consider an alternative, or just decide I'm not going to participate that day because that's just not something I want to subject myself to, but not deny the right of others who might decide that that's something that they want to take part in. I just think it's really dangerous. I think cancel culture is really dangerous because who gets to decide who gets to be canceled, right? I mean, I just, and I recognize it's perhaps easier for me to say that at, 60 plus years of age, having lived, a life where I've experienced much and have been blessed to have a very fancy, powerful position. So I know I'm in a different space than many folks, but I still do believe it's just a dangerous, slippery slope when, we decide we're going to cancel this person. Well, tomorrow they're going to decide to cancel us. And I just think that is problematic. So I'd really rather us focus on how can we arm ourselves with more facts so that we can continue to argue more strongly why it is that a particular position that we hold is one that we want to convince other people to come on over to our side.
Thank you. And we have another one coming from Karen, who will be on audio.
Hi there.
Hi, Karen.
Hi there. So I was, it's kind of a follow-up on Brandon's question. So the controversial speaker's truth may be grounded in conspiracy to us, but it may be truth to them and their followers. So how do we deny them without repercussions about their free expression being violated?
Right. So in all of my answers, I really want to say none of this is easy and none of this is exact. Right. And so I'm just giving you my perspective. It doesn't mean at the end of my talk, I have some case studies, which we won't get to, but I will leave them with you, which really shows that, it's one thing to say things in the abstract. It's way more complicated when you have an actual situation on campus. And so again, just want to kind of divide things from speakers, the university may invite. And I really do believe that at an educational institution that we very much can say our principles are we allow anyone to speak, but you have to speak from a position of facts, right? That is our, that's kind of our framework. However, it is the case that, student organizations can invite whomever it is that they want to invite to speak on campus. Sometimes we don't even know they're inviting them. Sometimes they have their own money from the student government. And so, that in some ways is a separate issue. It sometimes gets conflated as the university inviting the speaker, but it might be the student organization that is doing that. And so again, I think that is an opportunity for us to talk with students about, so what is your goal in inviting this particular speaker to campus? What is it that you hope that people are going to take away from this? Do you understand that the person who believes that Black folks are less intelligent than white folks, if you invite that person to come to campus, how that is going to make your African-American classmates feel, and are you okay with that? And then what are you going to do when there are repercussions on campus for the speaker that you invited? So, you know, part of what we do as educators is kind of walk through students through, you know, all of those particular steps in the process, so that, you know, they may in the end decide, okay, I'm going to go for it, go forward with it. But it isn't as if we haven't sat down and had a series of conversations about the ramifications of what might occur if they move forward in inviting a particular speaker on campus. And then at the same time, what can we do, back to Donia's question about concrete suggestions, to counter program and make sure that we have a speaker or a series of events that provides an alternative view.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that idea. I'm curious though, with student groups being able to invite folks without the university being party to that, because you sometimes need to be able to plan for campus safety.
Right.
I don't know, is there a way to, you know, be aware of that without violating, you know, groups' ability to do things on their own? I don't know.
Well, we do have rules on time, place, and manner. So, you know, at a public, all of us have rules on time, place, and manner, but at a public university where, you know, you have to be much more beholden to the First Amendment than I might have to be at DePaul, even though I would be anyway. We all have policies on time, place, and manner. So, you know, students in general have to work with somebody at the university if they are inviting a speaker on campus. But short of the time, place, and manner restrictions, we don't have the right to restrict a speaker from coming based on the content if a student organization is inviting that person on campus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm just thinking about January 6th.
Oh, yes. January 6th.
Yeah.
Say more. Yes. Go ahead, Karen.
I'm just thinking about how through dereliction of duty or not having information about what was coming or not understanding the information, how things could have been different, you know, if folks had known and really taken the threat seriously, how they could have planned ahead for that. And I'm just thinking in terms of student groups inviting folks and being able to plan ahead, and also, as you suggested, have someone counter, a counter speaker, how those things, you know, might work. But just being unprepared and some people having the knowledge and not sharing that knowledge seems a little bit dicey. And I know that I think on our campus at one point, I don't know, it's been a few years ago now, I think one of the political groups, I think it was a Republican group, had invited a controversial speaker, and then there was student outcry, and then it got canceled. But I'm also thinking too, in terms of CSU, not very far from us, in the past years has had folks who were actually in class and students who were provocateurs on campus, and how that made things really stressful for the campus.
I would say affirming everything that you said, Karen, absolutely. And, you know, I think it's good for us to anticipate that these things are likely to happen on our campuses, bring the folks together who are really important to be at the table to think about how would we respond if this does happen, so that when it does happen, we've at least gone through a set of scenarios in our minds, and understand none of this is easy. And likely to happen on your campus. I can't imagine that it's not going to. It's likely to happen on mine. And as I said, it's one thing for me to answer in the abstract and the philosophical. It's another for me to answer when I'm in the midst of it. But I do believe that, at least having some guidelines, making sure that we're bringing people together before any of this happens to walk through what we might do. And then, when something does happen, do a kind of after event, recap, to see what we might have done differently based on what occurred. Those are some of the things that I can offer. I also probably should have mentioned I'm part of a bipartisan task force that by the end of this academic year, we're going to come out with a paper where we hope to provide tools, concrete tools to universities to use around all of these issues. So stay tuned for that. That should come out later in the spring.
Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Dr. White. One more question. Want to be mindful of time.
I see one from Ashley.
I think we have two.
Okay.
Hey, you got in, Ashley and Melissa, but
Go ahead. I'll take the last two.
Okay. Melissa, did you want to come back on?
Yeah, I just was thinking about all of this in relation to campus climate, feelings of safety and belonging for students of color. So for instance, the UC system, some of the campuses have maybe 4 to 5% of the student population being Black, and grappling with the fact that having a speaker like Ben Shapiro come to campus and criticize the Black Lives Matter movement, and I would say utilizing an overall rhetoric of anti-Blackness, really has a disproportionate impact, I think, on students who are already in such a small percentage on the campus, and just grappling with the fact that we can have speech, but then the lived body experience of moving through spaces and places and power dynamics. And I just wondered, it's not really a clear question, but they said any more questions, and I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, no, I all I can say is I affirm that, right? That, those kinds of speakers who question the humanity of others make students who are already marginalized on campus wonder if the campus really cares about them or wants them there, right? And it's a really challenging situation. And so again, I don't have good answers, only to acknowledge it and say, if for some reason that were to happen, because as a public university, you probably can't tell Ben Shapiro he can't come. If a student group on campus has the money and has worked through all the other protocols, you can't on content tell somebody that they can't come. But what you can do is think about the counter programming, think about how you're going to work with your students on campus who might be most affected. And as I said, talk to the students who are arranging for that speaker to talk to them about the why. Help me understand, you have every right to bring this person, but can we talk about the why? And can we talk about the effect of that this person on our campus might have on folks who are already feeling marginalized? And it frustrates me because, when I was at Cal, while the percentages weren't higher for African Americans, weren't high, they certainly were higher than they are right now.
I share the frustration, President White, and I think that brings an important nuance about what you talked about when you shared the impact on identity, right? And so when you have that population, so having those conversations on the why and reminding folks of that, right? And the shared community, it might not change the outcome, but it certainly is a dialogue to have, right? So I think that's critically important. I think your last question is a great one. So Ashley, I don't know if you want to come back on, but great question.
Sure. I think, we've spent a lot of time talking about students and staff on university campuses, but you hold like the highest position on your campus. And so my question is kind of about, have you in your current position as a president of the university ever felt your own speech being limited because of your position? Or even as you've progressed in your career, did you notice a changing of your speech limitations?
What a great question, Ashley. So I will say I'm a brand new president. I've been in the seat for about 6 months since July. And I would say a few things. When I was going through the interview process, one of the great things about being my age is you can really show up as your authentic self, right? And so I had a great job that I loved. And so, whoa, sorry, there's a big bug just all of a sudden going on my notebook. Whoa, sorry about that. I was like, what is that? And so I had a great job that I loved. And I wasn't even sure I wanted to be a college president. And, the next time we get together, I'll go through the whole journey of how I ended up where I am as a college president. But what was freeing about the process for me is I could show up as my full authentic self. And so in showing up as my full authentic self, like I tried to do today with you all in my introduction, my board understands who I am and what's important to me. And they understand that when and God forbid, somebody else gets killed by the police, I'm going to want to say something about that. And of course, I'm going to, talk to my board chair and, make sure that I haven't, exposed the university in ways that I might not want to. But I do really feel that I can use my voice and show up as my full authentic self. But I don't know that I always was empowered to do that. Where you are in your career, that's a little bit different because, you got bosses on top of bosses on top of bosses on top of bosses, right? But what I will say to you is that we cannot be in places where we feel like we can't be who we are, right? And so if you feel like, you're not going to be the person, Ashley, who gets to issue the campus statement for UC Merced, but if you feel like you can't speak up about what you think is important or what you think might be wrong, and that you're going to be ostracized or that your job is in jeopardy because you do that, then you're not in the right place, right? And so we all have to determine for ourselves how can we be in places that enable us to be who it is that we are. And I really feel like DePaul has accepted all of me, right? And so that means that I feel like I can lead with whatever that word is. I can be authentic in my leadership, right? and show up as who I am for my students and for my faculty and for my staff and for my board.
I love
I
that.
have a board member on here. I don't know if he's still here. Tim, I don't know if you're still here, but.
As you said that, I started singing John Legend because all of me loves all of you. And I love all that you've brought to this conversation. Yeah. Please know that this is my personal invitation to you to, one, when we come back together, host you on campus, but we'd also love to have you share your journey. I think it's so important to have that. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. As I promised you, I am a woman of my word, and we're going to get to the giveaway time. We are giving away Cast, the book Cast. It's on, I know, a really great choice. I know. And so you're going to have a feedback survey. We ask you to drop that in the chat and also join us for the rest of the week. I'm going to turn it over to our graduate student research superstar and the point person for this week, Maria Ramirez Loyola, to take it away with our Wheel of Fortune, non-fortune, but it will be 5 of your fortunes.
That's great. Well, I'm going to say goodbye so I can get on to my next meeting. But thank you all so much. Really, really enjoyed it and look forward to visiting campus soon. All right. Talk to y'all later. Bye. I love this Wheel of Fortune. This is pretty cool. Okay, bye.
Thank you so much, President White.
Bye. Okay, see you later.
Bye. Thank you, Dr. White.
How about add lunch on me somewhere, right? So there you go. Okay, so somebody can win lunch on me. So when I visit campus, then I'll take them to lunch. How's that? Okay.
Got it.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Wait.
Awesome. Thank you so much, President
Thank you, guys.
White.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, and thank you so much, Tanya, Associate Chancellor Matos, for turning it over. As promised, before we end today's session, we're going to conclude just with a wonderful raffle. Everybody who registered for today's event had their names automatically entered into this raffle to win an ebook copy of Cast, Origins or Discontent by Isabel Wilkerson. So there's going to be 5 winners that are chosen. So I'm going to hit spin, and we'll all hear it together, and they'll be selected. And if you don't win today, don't feel disheartened or anything, because there's plenty of opportunities to win next time. Just register for any of our other events. So Brandon, congrats, you were the first winner. Yep, now we have Andrew. Awesome. So I'm gonna hit this 3 more times, and then we'll see our winners and we'll end for today. Yeah, so like I mentioned, if you don't win today, don't worry about it. There's all of the different Zoom sessions that we have for Free Speech Week. We're gonna give away 5 different ebooks. So just register. That's all you have to do to be entered. And if you win,
then we will give you a free ebook copy of Cast Origins or Discontent. Awesome, Brenda, thank you. And then the final winner for today's session is I think Andrew was chosen twice. Is that correct? Let me double check. Yep, Andrew was chosen twice, so good luck, Andrew, but I'll run it again for a different winner. What are the odds, right, that somebody would win twice in the same session? Okay, now we have our 5 individual winners. Yay! Yeah, congratulations to all of you. We'll contact you after today's event just to ask for some information to get that ebook once it's available for all of you. And yeah, to enter into our raffle, you just have to register for any of the other Zoom events, and we'll pick 5 winners at the end of each live event. Thank you all so much, and I'll turn it over to Associate Chancellor Matos for any last comments before concluding. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have much to say. I know we're ending a little early, but I want to thank all of you for attending, contributing to your personal growth, and taking these tools with you as we, as Dr. White say, move to sort of empower and create that armor for those dialogue that matters. So join us for the rest of the week. I know tonight we also have the keynote event with America's Got Talent winner Brandon Leak, the winner from 2020. That's tonight at 7. So bring your families, bring your folks, you know, enjoy the webinar with us. And we look forward to having you. Thank you for being in community with us. And we've enjoyed our time together. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Have a great day.